You may have heard that the Book of Enoch, the text famously banned from the Bible, is the ultimate proof of ancient aliens visiting Earth. It's a compelling theory, one that seems to explain so much advanced knowledge, otherworldly beings, and technologies beyond the comprehension of early man. But what if I told you that this popular theory, as captivating as it sounds, is merely a veil, a modern interpretation that distracts from a truth far more ancient and infinitely more terrifying? What if the reason this book was suppressed had nothing to do with hiding evidence of visitors from other planets, but everything to do with concealing a catastrophic act of rebellion within the divine order itself? For millennia, a story has been buried, a truth so profound it threatened the very foundations of early religious authority. This is not a story of spaceships and extraterrestrial scientists. It is the story of a cosmic betrayal, a story of holy guardians, celestial beings known as the Watchers, who abandoned their sacred posts, driven not by a mission of exploration, but by a consuming, earthly lust that would forever scar creation. Many will stop at the theory of aliens. It's a simple, digestible explanation for a complex mystery. But you are here. You've come to this channel because you sense that the ancient scriptures hold a weight, a spiritual gravity that cannot be explained away by technology and visitors from the stars. Your spirit knows there is something deeper waiting to be uncovered. This journey we are about to embark on will do more than offer an alternative theory. It will forever change the way you read the book of Genesis. You will finally understand the true forbidden context behind Noah's flood, the secret origin of the demonic forces that plague our world, and the shocking reason this breathtaking account was ultimately banned from the Bible. Before we pull back this sacred veil, be sure you are subscribed and have clicked the notification bell. The revelations in this text are too vital to be missed, and you will want to be part of the community that dares to explore them. Let us journey back to an age unrecorded in the stone of human monuments, an era when the earth was still young, breathing in the dawn of its own creation. This was the infancy of mankind. Humanity, a burgeoning race born from dust and divine breath, was beginning to spread across the continents, their numbers multiplying under a sky that seemed both immensely distant and intimately close. The air itself hummed with a different frequency. The rivers ran with a purity we can no longer imagine, and the veil between the physical and the spiritual was thin, almost translucent. In this primordial world, humanity was not alone. Above, in the celestial spheres, a class of divine beings was given a sacred and solemn charge. In the ancient texts, they are called the Ar, a Hebrew term that translates to the Watchers. They were not angels of worship who remained before the throne of the Almighty, nor were they messengers sent with proclamations. They were the custodians of a sacred boundary, the guardians of a cosmic law that decreed a separation between the realms of heaven and the realm of earth. Their station was one of great honor and immense responsibility. Their gaze was a shield, their presence a silent promise of divine order. Their duty was one of unwavering, non-interfering observation. They watched as the first villages were formed. They watched as humanity discovered fire, forged the first tools, and sang the first songs. They observed the beauty, the innocence, and the burgeoning complexity of mortal life. For eons, they fulfilled their purpose flawlessly, their minds as pure and unchanging as the stellar light that was their home. They were the silent shepherds of a reality they were forbidden to enter, the eternal witnesses to the grand experiment of humanity. But to watch for so long is to be changed by what you see. The boundary they were meant to guard was not merely spatial, but spiritual and ontological. It was a law against the mingling of natures, the immortal with the mortal, the holy with the profane. And as the centuries passed, the watcher's gaze began to linger. Their observation, once a dispassionate duty, slowly began to transform. From their celestial perch, they looked down upon the daughters of men, and they saw a beauty that was fragile, fleeting, and utterly captivating. It was a beauty born of mortality itself, something their own eternal existence could never know. And in the hearts of these once perfect beings, a seed of crisis was planted. It was not a thought of conquest, nor a desire for scientific study. It was a far more ancient and dangerous impulse, a celestial longing that slowly festered into a terrestrial, forbidden desire. The perfect order of creation was about to be fractured, not by an invading army from below, but by a consuming obsession from above. This growing obsession found its epicenter in the heart of their leader, a watcher of magnificent stature and authority named Semjaza. He, more than any other, felt the pull of this new, intoxicating gravity. The daily cycles of human life, of birth, love, and death played out before him like a divine drama he was forbidden to join. His eternal, unchanging existence began to feel less like a blessing and more like a gilded cage. He looked upon the daughters of men, and in their mortal expressions he saw a depth of feeling, a vibrancy of life that his own celestial nature lacked. The sacred duty to observe transformed into an agonizing temptation to experience. The conflict that raged within Semjaza was a storm of cosmic proportions. He was a prince of heaven, sworn to uphold the divine order. To breach the boundary was not merely to break a rule, it was to commit an act of cosmic treason, to introduce a dissonance into the perfect harmony of creation. He understood the catastrophic consequences, the pollution of divine lineage, the unleashing of forces that were never meant to mingle. Yet, the whisper of desire grew louder than the thunder of divine law. The image of mortal beauty became an idol in his celestial mind, eclipsing the glory of his Creator. He looked upon his brethren, the 200 watchers under his command, and he saw the same forbidden fire reflected in their eyes. He knew he was not alone in his transgression. This shared corruption led to a moment that would forever alter the destiny of both heaven and earth. As recorded in the 6th chapter of the Book of Enoch, Semjaza gathered his conspirators on the summit of Mount Hermon, a peak that straddles the very border of the Promised Land, a fitting stage for an act of profound betrayal. He stood before them and spoke, not as a commander, but as a fellow conspirator. He laid bare his intention to descend to the earth, to take the daughters of men as wives, and to beget children with them. He knew the gravity of this sin. He knew the eternal punishment that awaited them. And in a moment of cunning, he declared that if they were to commit this ultimate transgression, they would not do so individually. "I fear," he said, "that you may not be willing to do this deed, and I alone will have to pay the penalty of a great sin." And so he bound them together in a pact of mutual damnation. The text states, "They all swore together and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it." On that mountaintop, under the silent gaze of the stars, they were sworn to serve. 200 holy guardians of heaven made an oath, a curse upon themselves, to see this cosmic rebellion through to its bitter end. The fall was no longer a possibility, it was a promise. The gates of heaven were about to be abandoned, and the doors to chaos were about to be thrown wide open, with their unholy pact sealed. The 200 watchers descended from the celestial heights of Mount Hermon, their forms cloaked in a glory that humanity had never before witnessed up close. This was not a subtle arrival, it was a schism in the fabric of reality. The guardians of the boundary had become its first transgressors. They walked among the children of Adam, their divine radiance now tainted with a profane purpose. They took for themselves wives from among the daughters of men, teaching them the arts of seduction and adornment, corrupting the very innocence that had first captivated them. But their transgression went far beyond the sin of lust. Each watcher was a keeper of a specific domain of heavenly knowledge, secrets of creation never intended for mortal minds. Now, driven by a desire to impress and control their human companions, they began to unravel these sacred mysteries. Azazel, a leader of formidable rank among them, taught humanity the art of war. He revealed the secrets of metals, showing them how to forge swords, knives, and shields. He taught them to make the bracelets and ornaments they adorned themselves with, not for beauty alone, but as symbols of a newfound pride and vanity. He had given humanity the tools of organized violence, and the world would never know peace again. Others joined in this catastrophic tutelage. Semjaza, their leader, taught the arts of enchantment and root-cutting, the foundations of sorcery. Amaros revealed the resolving of enchantments. Barakijal taught the secrets of astrology, the reading of the stars not for navigation but for divination. Kokabil imparted the constellations, and Chazakiel, the knowledge of the clouds and weather. Asaradel revealed the motion of the moon. They opened a Pandora's box of celestial knowledge, but they gave it to a race spiritually unprepared to wield it. They armed humanity with the power of gods, but left them with the hearts of men. And from these unions, from this forbidden mingling of the sacred and the profane, a new race was born. The scriptures call them the Nephilim. They were not merely giants in stature, they were monstrous hybrids, demigods whose very existence was an abomination. They possessed the supernatural strength of their celestial fathers and the ravenous appetites of their earthly mothers, amplified to a terrifying degree. As they grew, they consumed all the acquisitions of men, and when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned upon them and began to devour mankind. They sinned against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish, and then they devoured one another's flesh and drank the blood. The earth, once a sanctuary of nascent life, was transformed into a charnel house, ruled by the insatiable hunger of these accursed offspring. The creation itself began to groan under the weight of this cosmic error. The world descended into a maelstrom of violence and depravity. The order established at the dawn of time had been shattered, replaced by a brutal reign of chaos lorded over by the Nephilim. These giants, with their insatiable hunger for both flesh and power, stalked the land. their very presence a blight upon the green earth. The knowledge imparted by the Watchers had not enlightened humanity. It had armed their darkest impulses. Brother turned against brother with newfound cruelty. Nations formed only to wage war, and the air, once filled with the songs of creation, now carried the stench of blood and the smoke of ceaseless conflict. The divine experiment of humanity was on the verge of total, catastrophic failure. It was in this dark age that the earth itself began to cry out. This was not a poetic metaphor, but a spiritual reality described with chilling clarity in the Book of Enoch. The text personifies the earth, depicting it as a living entity suffering under the unbearable weight of lawlessness. It says, "And the earth, laid waste, cried out unto the gate of heaven." The souls of men, slaughtered and consumed, joined this chorus of agony. Their spectral voices rose from the blood-soaked ground, a desperate, unending lament that ascended through the corrupted atmosphere, past the silent stars, seeking an audience in the highest courts of heaven. They cried out not for vengeance, but for justice, for an end to the torment inflicted upon them by the monstrous children of the fallen angels. And heaven heard. The Archangels, Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel looked down from their holy sanctuary and saw the world drowning in iniquity. They saw the blood that had been shed, the violence that had been wrought, and the sacred secrets that had been profanely revealed. They witnessed the suffering of humanity and the defilement of the earth. Turning from the horrifying spectacle, they approached the throne of the Almighty, carrying the cries of the world with them. They spoke before the Lord of Ages, recounting the sins of the Watchers, laying bare the rebellion of Azazel and the oath of Semjaza. They described the chaos unleashed by the Nephilim and the desperate plea of the human souls. The response from the Most High was not one of surprise, but of solemn, terrible judgment. He had seen all that had transpired. He saw that his perfect creation had been contaminated, not by the failings of mortal man alone, but by a direct, malicious intervention from his own celestial sons. The corruption was too deep, the stain too pervasive to be simply wiped away. A simple reset was no longer possible. The world did not need a correction. It needed a purification. It needed to be washed clean. And so, the decree went forth. A great flood would come, a deluge not born of arbitrary anger, but of cosmic necessity. The great flood was not a punishment for humanity's sin alone. It was the divine solution to an angelic rebellion that had pushed creation to the brink of utter annihilation, before the purifying waters were unleashed. However, judgment had to be pronounced upon the architects of this devastation. The divine court had convened, the evidence was undeniable, and the sentence was absolute. But this decree would not be delivered by a thunderclap from the heavens. A messenger was needed, one who could walk the razor's edge between the mortal and the divine, a man whose righteousness was so profound that he could stand in the presence of both angels and God without being consumed. That man was Enoch, the seventh from Adam. Enoch was not an abductee taken for study, nor an unwilling passenger on a celestial journey. He was a chosen emissary, a prophet ordained for a mission of terrifying magnitude. The text describes how he was hidden, taken away from the corrupted world to walk with God. learning the secret workings of the cosmos and the intricacies of divine law. He was shown the treasuries of the sun and moon, the storehouses of the wind and frost, and the geography of the seven heavens. This was not a tour, it was his ordination. He was being prepared to be the one mortal who could face the fallen watchers and speak with the authority of the throne of heaven. His mission was twofold and steeped in a tragic irony. First, he was sent to Azazel, the foremost in corruption. Enoch found him in the desolate wilderness, and there he pronounced the unalterable sentence, "Thou shalt be bound hand and foot and cast into the darkness. And on the great day of judgment he shall be cast into the fire." The being who had taught humanity to adorn themselves with shining metals was condemned to an eternity of absolute darkness. Next, Enoch was sent to the rest of the watchers. He found them gathered together, weeping, their once glorious faces shrouded in despair. They had seen the chaos they had wrought and were beginning to comprehend the totality of their error. When they saw Enoch, a flicker of hope ignited within them. They begged him, the mortal man, to be their intercessor, to write a petition for them and plead their case before the Most High. Enoch, in his compassion, did as they asked. He wrote down their prayers for forgiveness and read them aloud by the waters of Dan. But as he prayed, he fell into a sleep and was shown a vision. In the vision, he was lifted into the heavens and brought before the divine throne itself. And there he received the final, irrevocable answer. He was commanded to return to the watchers and tell them, "There shall be no peace for you. From henceforth you shall not ascend into heaven for all eternity, and in bonds of the earth the decree has gone forth to bind you for all the generations of the world." Their hope was extinguished, their judgment was sealed. Enoch, the human prophet, had delivered the final verdict upon the fallen sons of God. The judgment upon the watchers was absolute, and the great flood was ordained to cleanse the earth of their physical taint, the monstrous bodies of their offspring. The Nephilim, the waters would rise and wash away the blood-soaked civilizations, returning the world to a baptismal purity, ready for a new beginning with Noah and his family. This act would solve the problem of the physical corruption, but it created a far more insidious spiritual problem. A question lingered in the cosmic silence that followed the judgment. What would become of the spirits of the Nephilim? This question leads us to one of the most profound and shocking secrets revealed in the Book of Enoch, a theological key that unlocks countless mysteries in the scriptures that followed. The Nephilim were unnatural hybrids. They were a fusion of two distinct natures, the mortal, flesh and blood essence of humanity, and the immortal, spiritual essence of the angels. They did not truly belong to either realm. Their gargantuan bodies were of the earth, and so they could be destroyed by the physical waters of the flood. But their spirits, inherited from their celestial fathers, were eternal. They could not be destroyed. So where would these disembodied spirits go? They could not ascend to heaven, for they were born of sin, and their nature was corrupt. Heaven would not receive them. Yet they could not descend into Sheol, the shadowy realm of the dead, like human souls, for they were not fully human. They were trapped. The Book of Enoch provides the terrifying answer in chapter 15. And now the giants, who are produced from the spirits and flesh, shall be called evil spirits upon the earth, and on the earth shall be their dwelling. Evil spirits have proceeded from their bodies, because they are born from men, and from the holy watchers is their beginning and primal origin. They shall be evil spirits on earth, and evil spirits shall they be called. This is the forbidden revelation. The origin of what we now call demons is not a separate creation of evil, nor are they the original fallen angels who are bound in darkness. The demons that plague humanity, that tempt and torment, are the disembodied, eternally hungry, and malevolent spirits of the dead Nephilim. The flood cleansed the earth of their bodies, but it unleashed their spirits upon it. They are cursed to wander the earth, forever resentful of the humanity they can no longer fully possess, and forever yearning for the physicality they lost. They are the spiritual debris of a cosmic rebellion, an eternal echo of the Watcher's original sin, left to wreak havoc until the final day of judgment. This single revelation reframes the entire landscape of spiritual warfare as depicted in the Bible. It is not a vague struggle against an abstract evil, but a direct conflict with the cursed lineage of the fallen ones. With this forbidden knowledge of the origin of demons, the entire biblical narrative snaps into a new, sharper focus. It is as if we have been given a cipher to decode a hidden layer of meaning woven throughout the Old and New Testaments. Suddenly, scattered and cryptic verses ignite with profound significance. The story of the Watchers and the spirits of the Nephilim is not a fringe mythology. It is the missing prequel, the cosmic backstory that explains the very nature of the spiritual conflict that defines the human story. Consider the New Testament. When Jesus of Nazareth begins his ministry, what is one of his most prominent and powerful works? It is the casting out of demons. He confronts them in the synagogues, in the wild country of the Gadarenes, and in the bodies of the tormented. These are not abstract forces of evil, they are distinct personalities. They have names, like Legion, and they recognize Christ's divine authority with terror. They beg not to be sent into the abyss, the very place their angelic forefathers, the Watchers, were imprisoned. This is not a coincidence. When Christ confronts a demon, he is not merely healing a man. He is directly engaging with the cursed, lingering legacy of the Watcher's rebellion. He is undoing the spiritual contamination that began on Mount Hermon. The apostles themselves understood this hidden history perfectly. How else can we explain the chillingly specific references in their epistles? The Apostle Peter, in his second letter, writes of the angels who sinned, whom God cast down to hell and delivered into chains of darkness, to be reserved for judgment. He then immediately connects this event to sparing not the old world, but saving Noah, bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly. He is not telling a new story. He is referencing the well-known account from the Book of Enoch. Jude, the brother of James, does the same, speaking of the angels who did not keep their proper domain, but left their own abode, whom God has reserved in everlasting chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day. These are not vague allusions. They are direct, explicit references to the sin of the Watchers. Now we can begin to understand why this book was deemed so dangerous, why it was ultimately excluded from the canonical scriptures by later councils. It revealed a cosmic war far more complex and terrifying than the simple narrative of Adam's fall. It populated the spiritual landscape not just with God and a single fallen adversary, but with a whole hierarchy of rebellious divine beings, monstrous demigods, and a pervasive plague of disembodied spirits. Perhaps it wasn't banned because it told of aliens, a concept utterly foreign to its authors. Perhaps it was banned because the theological truth it told was too raw, too frightening, and too disruptive to the neat and orderly doctrines that the burgeoning religious institutions sought to establish. It revealed a world not just fallen, but actively and perpetually haunted. The suppression of the Book of Enoch from the mainstream canon did not erase its influence. It merely drove it into the shadows, where its echoes continued to resonate through the centuries. The rebellion of the Watchers left a permanent scar on the spiritual consciousness of humanity, a story too powerful to be entirely forgotten. It became the archetype for a specific kind of evil, the corruption that comes not from below, from the beastly nature of man, but from above, from the perversion of the sacred. It is the story of how the greatest light can cast the darkest shadow. This narrative became a crucial lens through which ancient cultures understood the pervasive and seemingly inexplicable presence of suffering and chaos in the world. The violence, the disease, the madness that plagued humanity, these were not seen as random misfortunes. They were the tangible effects of a spiritual war, the ongoing malevolence of the spirits of the Nephilim. This belief provided a framework, a dark and terrible logic, for the spiritual battles that shamans, priests, and exorcists have fought since time immemorial. The story of the Watchers gave a name and a lineage to the unseen forces that whispered temptations into the hearts of kings and brought plagues upon the innocent. And its relevance has not faded with the rise of modernity. In our world today, a world that prides itself on scientific reason and dismisses ancient tales as mere superstition, the echo of this rebellion persists. When we witness acts of seemingly inhuman cruelty, of violence so extreme it defies all rational explanation, we are seeing the same spiritual pathology described in the age of the Nephilim. When we see the insatiable hunger for power, for consumption at any cost, the very trait of the giants who devoured the earth, we are seeing the ancient spiritual pattern play out in modern dress. The story reminds us that the human struggle is not just against our own flawed nature, but against spiritual principalities and powers with a deep, ancient hatred for mankind. This forbidden history is more than a relic. It is a diagnostic tool for the human condition. It tells us that the veil between our world and the spiritual realm is fragile, and that supernatural forces, both benevolent and malevolent, are deeply invested in the affairs of humanity. The echo of the Watcher's fall is not just a story in a buried text. It is a subtle hum beneath the noise of our daily lives, a constant reminder of a cosmic war that never truly ended, a war whose battles are fought every day in the quiet theater of the human soul. In the end, the epic tale of the Watchers, preserved in the forbidden pages of the Book of Enoch, is more than a history of angels and giants. It is a sacred mirror, reflecting a timeless spiritual drama that unfolds not just in the cosmos, but within each and every one of us. The story is not meant to be merely observed from a safe distance. It is an invitation to understand the architecture of our own souls and the nature of the choices we face. The rebellion of the Watchers is the ultimate story of crossing a forbidden boundary. They were guardians, given a position of immense honor and trust, with one simple, profound directive to watch, but not to touch. Their fall was not a momentary lapse, but a conscious decision to abandon their sacred purpose in pursuit of a fleeting, earthly desire. It is a chilling reminder that even the most exalted beings, those closest to the divine light, are not immune to the temptations of the flesh and the pride of the heart. This ancient drama forces us to ask ourselves profound and challenging questions. Where is your Mount Hermon? What is the sacred boundary in your own life that you are called to guard? It may be a vow, a commitment, a moral conviction, or a divine calling. It is the line that separates your higher purpose from your lower desires. What are the siren's calls that tempt you to abandon your post? What are the beautiful, captivating distractions of this world that whisper for you to forsake your eternal mission for a moment of temporal satisfaction? The Book of Enoch ultimately presents us with a choice, not just in belief, but in perception. One worldview offers a universe of cold, indifferent aliens and technological intervention, a story that, while fascinating, ultimately leaves humanity as a mere scientific experiment. The other, the one buried for centuries, reveals a universe alive with spiritual significance, where our choices have cosmic consequences, where a divine order was betrayed, and where a war for the soul of creation is still being waged. Which reality do you choose to see? The truth revealed in the Book of Enoch is not comfortable, but it is powerful. It affirms that our struggles are real, that the forces we contend with are formidable, and that our choices to uphold our sacred boundaries matter for eternity. If this journey into the forbidden history of the Watchers has resonated with you, share your thoughts below. Let us build a community of seekers who are unafraid to explore the profound and often terrifying truths that have been hidden from us. For in understanding this ancient rebellion, we are better armed to win the war within ourselves.